I'd like to say good evening to everyone. Good evening. It's good to see everyone out. Of course, we're back in our church tonight. The DS got a hold of me Monday, and he was asking me about the deed to their attorney was looking for the deed to the property, and it just said it wasn't looking right. Want to know where there's got to be another deed. Well, I said, I can help you with that. And I said, I know we have two of them, and he wanted to know about it. So I said, well, one of them, I said, because they were looking in the Clay County Courthouse. I mean, you can pull that up, I guess, online now. I guess that's what you can do. Some of them you can and see it or whatever, but they couldn't find, and the deed that's recorded in Clay County is for the mid-'80s, and where's the other one? Well, they forgot that Clay County was part of Nicholas County back in the 1850s. So the other one is recorded in Nicholas County. So they didn't have that ready to turn in to the conference for yesterday. There's a meeting in 2 weeks. They said the cabinet meeting, so they're hoping to have everything put together and do it then. But he said, first keep using the church until he tells us otherwise. So I figure we'll be back here soon. So here we are again, and so that's where we're at. We're in Matthew chapter 9. Matthew chapter 9. We studied through chapter 8 last time. Again, these are a lot of a series of healings or miracles that was performed by Jesus, all quite in a row here from Matthew. If you study Mark and Luke and even in John, some of these same miracles are recorded in those. There are others that's not in Matthew, and a lot of them, especially in Luke, you'll see there's a lot more detail in some of these. Mark also has more. A little more detail. I kind of find it interesting that studying Mark was the first gospel that was wrote. I know Matthew is the one that's recorded in the New Testament first, but Mark was actually written before Matthew. So there was a lot more details. Again, you have to look at the audience of who these Gospels were written to. Matthew here was written to Jewish believers, and Matthew was writing to his fellow Jews, trying to convince them of Jesus' being the Messiah. So he has a lot of the miracles right here in a row. A lot of them are read right together real quickly. Same with the type, so that he could see that he had the authority, as they use Abraham and Moses as the ones that wrote the laws. So they're seeing how Jesus fulfills the laws. So that's the reason why they're wrote kind of fast and not much as detailed as some of the others, because of the audience they were writing to. So it goes into Matthew chapter 9, and he says, and he entered into a ship and passed over and came into his own city. Now his own city was Galilee, where he spent most of his adulthood. Most of his earthly teaching was done around Galilee. And he says, and behold, they brought a man sick of the palsy, lying on a bed. And Jesus, seeing their faith, said unto the sick of the palsy, Son, be of good cheer, thy sins be forgiven thee. Now, we know this is the story, if you go out into some of the other Gospels, of the man that was carried on each corner. You know, they come to the house, they couldn't get into the house. I believe it was not Simon's house, but it was the other Simon and his brother's house. They come into there. They couldn't get in. They carried him to the roof. We know the story how they broke the roof apart and lowered him down. Of course, a lot of those details are not in this story. So, but here's the interesting part. He says, "Son, be of good cheer, thy sins be forgiven thee." Now, he did that because he knows that sitting in the audience, as the next verse says, "And behold, certain of the scribes say within themselves, this man blasphemes." See, the scribes knows the law. They know the teaching they've been taught very well. They know that only God can forgive sin. And when he says here to thy sins be forgiven thee, he can read the hearts of those that was watching. And he did it for, I think, partly for their benefit as well. And Jesus, knowing their thoughts, says to them, "Wherefore think ye evil in your hearts?" See, they know that the Scriptures, they know the Old Testament very well. They know that God can only forgive sins. That's what they've been taught. That's what they believe. And so when they think he's committing blasphemy, the rage that would be building up in them, Jesus can perceive that rage building up in them. That's the reason he asked them, "Therefore think ye evil in your hearts." Why is it making you so mad? Why is this messing with your heart so much? For whether it is easier to say, "Thy sins be forgiven thee," or to say, "Arise and walk." Jesus could have said either one. Either one he could have done, forgiven of your sins. You see, we know that in that time when there was something wrong with you, the man had palsy. His legs and his arms didn't work. They believed that the reason he was that way was there was either sin in his life or the life of his parents. Because they are quite often referred to that as the sin that caused the sickness. So by Jesus saying, "Thy sins be forgiven," means he's cleansed. Or is it easier just to heal him and say, "Get up and walk"? You see, it means the same thing to them. It's a little different in our time. We think of it a little bit different, but in their time, it would be the same thing. Sin caused the condition he's in, so he can be cleansed of that sin to be walked. And I'm sure his family took him to the temple many times. They probably offered up sacrifices. They probably prayed over him and did all of those things that interceded on his behalf. Just the way the priests and stuff was supposed to. For whether it is easier to say, "Thy sins be forgiven thee," or to say, "Arise and walk." But that ye may know that the Son of Man hath power on earth to forgive sin. See, the Son of Man is something that the scribes that was in his audience would recognize from the Old Testament. The Son of Man would refer to the Son of God. So he called himself here the Son of Man, the Son of God. So here he's saying that he has power. He did it so that they could see that he had that power to heal and forgive sin. Then saith he to the sick of the palsy, "Arise, take up thy bed, and go unto thine house." Of course, we know from the story, if you go and read some others, it says, "And he arose and departed to his own house." But when the multitude saw it, they marveled and glorified God, which had given such power unto men. Isn't that something?
Don't sound like the common people were mad or angry with him for forgiving.
Oh no, they're not. They're, can you imagine how desperate the people in that time were? We see the examples of it around us. People would give anything they can to extend their life a little bit longer. People will go to lengths to go see doctors and way off in other places just to be healed. Can you imagine back then when doctors was very few, that the medicine they had was not very good, or they didn't have the penicillin to fight off a simple bacteria that we have? Can you imagine how desperate your life was if you were sick? What hope did you have? To see someone that can heal those that were sick, boy, how that must affect those around that was watching.
Gave them a lot of hope, I'm sure.
Oh, I'm sure it gave them a lot of hope.
Like you said, it was a hope. It's pretty much a hopeless situation unless God intervenes. Because, like you said, medicine wasn't good.
I find this next one here, to me, has always been one of, I don't know that I call it one of my favorite, but it's a story that intrigues me very much in the Bible. Of course, you can go and read it in other Gospels. It has other parts to it. But it says, and as Jesus passed forth from thence, from where he was at, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at the receipt of custom. Now, sitting at the receipt of custom means he sat at the tax collector's table. He is sitting collecting taxes. Now, that is what they called a publican at the time. That was someone that collected taxes. They was much hated by the Jewish people. Very much hated.
Not very well like today.
No, not very well either. I know I've told you all this before, but I interviewed for a job for the IRS, and it was considered taken because the pay was pretty good, and it was pretty good. And I remember talking to my sister-in-law, Jerry's wife, Charlotte, and I said, I'm thinking about getting a job with the IRS. She said, oh, you don't want it. You know how many people hate the IRS. So Patsy actually has a cousin that was an IRS agent for years. She even carried a badge with her. But here is Matthew sitting at the receipt of custom. And Jesus said unto him, follow me. And he arose and followed him. Now, I find that story very, very interesting. Here is someone that was hated by the Jews, someone who was considered an enemy of the Jews. He was working for those who had control over them. They had oppressed them and taken them down and beaten them down so much. They was trying to fight against them and rise back up, and they would put them down. And here was one of their own that was taken. And I believe that in some of the other Gospels it speaks about how Matthew's family disowned him. His father said he had no son. So we can see how much he was hated. Someone who was against society so bad. And I try to think of that in our terms today. People that society hates so much. I think of the people that are in prison, that has committed horrendous crimes, things that we would hate them so much, but God can even call them. He calls all of us. The same as Matthew was called, so was all of the other disciples. He wasn't called any differently. You remember him walking along the shore and saw Simon and his brother and all the others that he called. He called Matthew in the same way. I think of these people that are probably walking up and down the street here that's homeless, that's hooked on drugs. I just read a story not too long ago of a lady in her 70s who got clean. And, we kind of think of people that's hooked on drugs as being young, but this lady was telling her testimony of her being in her 70s and having an accident and got hooked on the pain medicine. And all of these people that society, we turn our back on and we don't think much of them, but Jesus calls them the same way that he calls us. That's the reason I like this one so much. And Matthew just gave it all up. They were very well off. The tax collectors, the publicans as they call them, because they got paid very well for doing their work. Some of them added a little extra and took things. Remember the story of Zacchaeus? What was Zacchaeus? He was a tax collector. And when Jesus called him and said he was coming to his house, and he was called, he paid him back and paid him back with interest on those that he had cheated. Matthew followed. Not only that, it says, and it came to pass as Jesus sat at meat in the house. Now that house is Matthew's house. Some of the other Gospels will bring that out a little more. He dined at Matthew's house. That's a publican. That's their enemy. They don't want to do it. And the band of people that would have been following after Jesus, his disciples, that he had called. Now, you realize that it wasn't just Jesus' disciples that followed Jesus. There were others that would have traveled. Those are the ones that are just named as just his disciples, but throughout the Gospels will bring out, and so does other parts of the Bible, that sometimes Jesus taught those that was with him, but sometimes he pulled his disciples aside privately to teach. Because when he left, he was going to leave his disciples to carry on his work, but there were others that followed after him. And some of those others that came by, I believe they were mentioned here. And it came to pass as Jesus sat at meat in the house, behold, many publicans and sinners came and sat down with him and his disciples. A lot of the other ones was the publicans and sinners. People that we probably wouldn't want in our house. People we wouldn't invite to come into our house and eat with us. At Matthew's house. Now, it probably wasn't such a big deal to Matthew because he didn't have any Jewish friends. And having a house full of people for him was probably a big deal that he actually had people to show up, because I'm sure if he had any other dinner parties, nobody else would have showed up. He was hated by his own people. Now he had a house full of people. And when the Pharisees saw it, they said unto his disciples, why eateth your masters with publicans and sinners?
What nationality was Matthew?
He was Jewish. Mm-hmm. He was a Jew the same as the rest of them. Why was these Pharisees higher up than the scribes saw him sitting with these publicans and sinners? Why does he eat with them? Now, do you think any of the Pharisees or the scribes or the Sadducees, those that thought that they was the holiest of the holy ones and the example for, do you think they would invite them into their house or go into their house and eat with them?
I think it's like that story about that man Jimmy. He wasn't a Samaritan, and the Jews went away on the other side of the road to go around.
Now, it was a Jew man that was injured.
Was it the Jew?
It was a Samaritan that found him.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, but anyway, yes, people just go out of the way to shun somebody.
Yes. I like Jesus' answer here. But when Jesus heard that, he said unto them, They that be whole need not a physician, but they that are sick. What's he saying? Those that are whole, those that perceive themselves as being righteous, those that think that they're all right, Jesus is probably not going to change their mind anyway. He didn't come for them. Well, he came for them also. But he came to those that were sick, those that were sin sick, those that needed help, those that when we cried out for help, when we was in our lowest point, when we needed help, he came to us, didn't he? Still, when we're in our lowest points and we get bogged down with things, and it just seems like our load is too much to bear, we can cry out to him and he will still come and help us to bear his load. He says, take his yoke upon us, because it's easy. Cast your cares upon the Lord. That's the sick that he's talking about. He said, but go ye and learn what that meaneth. I will have mercy and not sacrifice. For I am not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. Now, I believe if you go back and look at that just a little bit, that is in Malachi? I believe it's where that quote is coming from. And if you go and look at that, the righteous here, when he says, say what it meaneth, I will have mercy and not sacrifice. Now, we know under the Old Testament, when there was sin in the life, and they had to do it at certain times, he went and offered a sacrifice. Well, we don't have to do that. He already was that sacrifice for us. So what he has for us is his mercy. But you see, those that think they're righteous, or those that are self-righteous, as a lot of the Pharisees, Sadducees, the scribes, they were self-righteous. He talked about a lot of that in the Sermon on the Mount, didn't he? About how they like to stand on the street corners and make long prayers and disfigure their face to look like they're going through different things and changing their clothes to make themselves look different. Those are the self-righteous. He didn't come for them. He come for to offer the sinners repentance. That's what he came for. Thank God for that, isn't it? We need it. Then came to him the disciples of John, saying, why do we say the Pharisees fast oft, but thy disciples fast not? Fasting. That's the other thing that Jesus talked about, how the Pharisees made a big show of fasting. Not cleaning their face and not washing up, but to look like they're fasting and that they're struggling with it, and they like to do it twice a week and all this stuff that was going on. Why does all of those religious ones do it? And why does not the disciples of Jesus fast? That's the question that John's followers had for him. John told them that they needed to fast. Why didn't Jesus teach fasting? Well, Jesus answers it here. Can the children of the bridegroom mourn as long as the bridegroom is with them. But the day will come when the bridegroom shall be taken from them, and then shall they fast. They had Jesus with them. Why did they fast? Why did they fast? They did it to most of the time, people today fast, and one of the reasons why you fast is if you have something that you have a strong desire for, spiritually speaking.
My brother would do that. Oh, he would do that. If he had a big problem, he didn't know how to solve it, he would fast.
Absolutely.
3 days at a time. But he wouldn't tell nobody he was doing it, but I could always tell. But he just, that's what he did. When he had a problem, he took it to the Lord and he fasted until that problem was solved.
That's usually why you fast. Maybe there's an upcoming revival and they're in prayer for that. They may fast for that. Maybe there's a problem in the family or somebody's sick or something's going on. You prayed and you fast to show that you're turning it over to the Lord and you want His help. Why would you cry out to Jesus for help if Jesus is with you? See, that's what His disciples had. They had Jesus with them. Why did they need to fast and ask for help from God when God in the flesh was with them? But Jesus says that there will come a day, speaking of foretelling of His own death, there will come a time when He's not with them. That is when they're going to fast. He says, no man putteth a piece of new cloth over an old garment, for that which is put in the full, or the field, it up taketh from the garment, and the rent is much worse. Now, I don't know about y'all, and I figure most of you was like I was. When I was growing up, we was pretty rough boys. We always got our knees in our pants had got a hole in them quite often because we was rough on pants. And my mom would sew a patch on them, usually on the inside, and or sometimes it'd be on the outside if it was older clothes and she didn't care what it looked like, she'd have a patch on the outside. And then when you wind up tearing it again, you didn't tear that patch, you tore where that patch sewed into because that patch was newer material than that was around it, and it would tear that old garment.
That's what my mom would do. There's a hole in her pants, so she'll patch it. So little John took his up there one day and he's going hunting. He took them off because the kind of, now the kids want holes in them already. Lay there, and Mom on her son, she just patched every hole in it. He come back and said, Grandma, what did you do? She said, you had holes in them, I patched them. He said, I didn't want them patched.
Yeah, if we wore our clothes like that, my mom would have been ashamed.
And you know, they had her, they don't have clothes on there all patched.
That's what Jesus is talking about in fasting. Why would they need to worry about patching what they have right now when He's with them? Neither do man put new wine into an old bottle. Even the bottle, else the bottle will break and wine runneth out and the bottles perish, but they put new wine into new bottles and both are preserved. Now, bottles that they had was not glass bottles like we had. They was usually some kind of a skin. Now, skin that they carried water in and all the other stuff, over time it'll stretch out. So as wine, of course, when it ferments, it expands. So why would you put wine into, or the juice into an old skin, knowing it's going to ferment and expand, and it's just going to stretch it till it breaks? That's what he's talking about, fasting and being with Jesus. When He was with them, when God was in flesh with them, why did they do that? They didn't need to. We we jump over to another story. It says, while he spake these things unto them, behold, there came a certain ruler. Now, in the other Gospels, he's referred to as Jairus. That saying, my daughter is even now to death. But come and lay thy hand upon her, and she shall live. And Jesus arose and followed him, and so did his disciples. Now, all of these are things that's happening, and I know as I was studying this over the last little bit, I was thinking every one of these, I could preach a whole sermon on each one of these very easily. But we see Jairus here. He's coming, and there's an issue going on, and he needs help. His daughter is sick. Now, Jairus, if we study out that he was a keeper of, and I can't remember what his title was, but he worked in the temples and kept the documents, is what it was. He was not a scribe, or maybe he was a scribe, but he worked and kept. So he would have heard about Jesus from those in the temples, good or bad. You know, Jesus had those that was in the temples that was secret disciples that defended him. So Jairus would have known. He would have heard the stories. Even those that talked evil, he would have heard of Jesus. Again, when there is a need in your life, they turn to, when things got so bad they had nowhere else to turn, they turned to Jesus. On the way there, it says, behold, a woman which was diseased with an issue of blood 12 years, came behind him and touched the hem of his garment. For she said unto herself, if I may but touch his garments, I shall be whole. Now, what kind of faith did this woman have? You understand that she was considered unclean. If you touched her as a Jew, you had to go cleanse yourself. Into the river, into Jordan, you had to go cleanse yourself. There was a ceremony that had to be done. You had to be clean.
Because of her blood issue.
Because of the issue of her blood. Now, when a woman had her, as we considered her period and stuff, and when that happened in that time, the woman was unclean. The man was not supposed to touch her during that time. So here we are. So she knows that she couldn't go to him openly. For him to touch her, he would be unclean. And the crowd that was around her, anyone that was, and we know the other Gospels talked about how the crowd was around him, how they pressed up against him, and they would have been pressing up against her. She didn't want anyone to know that she had issues. But she knew, had enough faith that she needed to get to Jesus. But can you imagine how scared she would have been to have faced him and asked him? For 12 years, she was shunned by everybody. No touching anybody. Don't be around people. Kind of make you wonder how she made her money or made her living. But said that she spent all that she had in the other Gospels. But Jesus turned him about, and when he saw her, he said, daughter, be of good comfort. Thy faith hath made thee whole. And the woman was made whole from that hour. And when Jesus came into the ruler's house and saw the minstrels and the people making a noise. Now, minstrels and minstrels were people who were paid to wail and moan when someone died. There was those that was minstrels. They was the ones that made the music, and they would make noise, and they would do all of this stuff. And the higher in society you would have, the more you would have at a funeral or when someone died. And Jesus said unto him, Give place, for the maid is not dead, but sleepeth. And they laughed him to scorn. See, they knew she was dead. They've already come out and said she's dead. Somebody pronounced her dead. I don't know who did that or how they did it in that time. I'm sure I could study that and find it out. But she was dead, and they called in these people. Can you remember, think of Jairus? Remember in the other Gospels, somebody come and told him not to worry about it. She was already dead. And as they got closer to his home, he could hear the wailing and the music playing, and oh, how he must have felt being so far off and can hear it. What do you think his wife felt when the daughter was dying and he wasn't there? But see, he had a secret weapon, didn't he? But when the people were put forth, he went up and took her by the hand, and the maid arose. And the fame thereof went abroad unto all the land. Well, let me see. Maybe if I speed up a little bit, we'll get through this one. And when the people departed thence, 2 blind men followed him, crying and saying, Thou Son of David, have mercy on us. The Son of David. They knew, when they were calling out, they knew that was the lineage of the Messiah to come. And they were calling out to him because they've heard the stories. And they probably didn't know for sure, but they at least knew that he was of the lineage of David, the Son of David. Have mercy on us. And when he had come into the house, the blind man came to him, and Jesus said unto him, Believe ye that I am able to do this? Do you believe that I can heal you? Now, they probably done heard all of the other stories. The stories of the leopard, the woman with the issue of blood, maybe how he raised the dead. All of these stories that they would have heard. About him maybe walking on the sea. Do you believe that they said unto him, Yea, Lord, we believe. Right? Then touched he their eyes, saying, According to your faith, be it unto you. What do you think if he touched them and they didn't have faith? Would it have worked? Probably not. And their eyes were opened, and Jesus straightly charged them, saying, See that no man know it. But they, when they were departed, spread abroad his fame into all that country. And as they went out, behold, there brought to him a dumb man, possessed of a devil. Now they believed that people that couldn't speak at that time had a devil in them that caused that. He says, and when the devil was cast out, the dumb spake, and the multitude marveled, saying, It was never so seen in Israel. You know, they had a lot of people going around doing tricks and making people think that they could do things, but they had never seen anyone who actually could make the blind see, make the dumb speak, and raise the dead. But the Pharisees said, He cast out devils through the prince of the devils. Now we know in other ones, there's not much said on this, but we know that he talked about how can Satan cast out Satan. So the Pharisees need to blame somebody. He couldn't be doing it on God's authority. Why? Because that should have been given to them, not him. They're the religious ones. Jealousy. And Jesus went about all the cities and villages, teaching in the synagogues and preaching the gospel of the kingdom, and healing every sickness and every disease among the people. But when he saw the multitudes, he was moved with compassion. There's that word again on them. Because they fainted and were scattered abroad as sheep having no shepherd. Now, sheep having no shepherd, folks, those of you that know anything about sheep, they're not very smart animals. We raised a few of them. They were probably the dumbest animals you can have as a sheep. If there's nobody there to guide them or lead them along, we had one. Sarah would take them out. We had two of them up there. Sarah would take them out of their pen on a rope, and she would tie that rope to a cinder block because they could pull it, but they couldn't pull it very far. And that one would be grazing around in the grass, and every time we popped around the corner and it seen it, it would take off running as fast as it could. It got to the end of that rope, and it would flip it backwards. Every time that thing, that was the dumbest animal that couldn't figure out not to do that. I'm surprised it made it. But when they saw the people just scattered abroad and they fainted, it means they were weary. They were tired. Then saith he unto his disciples, the harvest truly is plenteous, but the laborers are few. Pray ye therefore the Lord of the harvest, that he may send forth laborers into his harvest. Folks, that is the same prayer that he has for us today. If we would look around outside these doors at all of the people that is around us that's not in churches, that are seeking after something, who is probably needing something in their lives, the harvest is plentiful. We just need to have some laborers. All right, we'll pick up from there next week. I'm sure we'll be back here next week, because he said the earliest it'll be done will be 2 weeks away, so I'm sure we'll be back here next week. And then after that, we'll see how it goes from there.